Hi everyone, it's Llama here from Llama Paints Minis, and today I'm actually going to answer some questions that I frequently get. And it comes from perhaps the more beginner side of the painting community, and they'll ask me how to do things like how to load your brush and thin your paint. Well, hopefully I'll be able to at least get you to a good starting point. And you can do this with either your standard round brush, or like here, I've got this Arrowhead size 0 Kolinsky Sable brush by Kimera. I've just gotten very comfortable with it. Lots of different applications with the unique shape of the head. And there's my wet palette set up pretty standard. Most people have those by now. If you're not sure, you can look around and see what they consist of. This one has a lot of room for me to mix, which I like to do. And here I've got a not Pokemon at all card for an unknown character. And then I've just got some standard paints here. Those ones that magically appeared are Phthalo Blue Green Shade, Cold Yellow, and the White. They're all from the Kimera Colors Pure Pigment base set, and I've got a microfiber cloth. So you can see I've rinsed my brush, and I run it through the microfiber cloth. So those bristles are still damp, but they're in a nice sharp point. And the reason I use the microfiber cloth instead of like paper towel or tissue is just it draws less moisture out, and it's a little bit kinder to the bristles. So here you can see I'm just going to dip straight in to the Phthalo Blue. It's very thick, very full-bodied paint. You can see that the surface tension's all uneven, and it forms a giant blob on my brush. Now, if I took that straight to the model, it would be a disaster, right? It would clog up detail, it would be all streaky and uneven, and that's no good. So we have to do something to the paint. Now, historically, in the old days of the internet, when people talked about how to thin them, they would say you want to go for a milk-like consistency. But that wasn't very helpful. You know, what do you sweeten condensed milk or skim milk, right? So here, without adding anything other than the natural remaining dampness of the bristles, I just draw the paint out flat on the wet palette. And with a lot of the paints we use in this hobby, sometimes that's enough. Because if you notice, it did thin it out, the little bit of moisture in the bristles and a little bit of moisture on the palette. And then by spreading it evenly through the bristles, that will actually give us sort of the thinness we desire for something like a base coat. I'm going to repeat the process here, this time with the Cold Yellow. Same thing, I'm going to make this little puddle, ignoring that stupid bump in the paper that was there. But I'm using these three colors here because, as far as I can tell, this totally not Squirtle character is often a sort of turquoisey or aquamarine color. Well, to make that with a pure pigment paint, you're going to want to use a blue, a yellow, and a little bit of white, and you just kind of want to play with them until you get where you need. It's also important to note that when you're working with pure pigment paints like this, they will have a lot of vibrancy, a lot of intensity. But they might not cover the way you're used to with a standard miniature paint. Those paints typically have some sort of acrylic thinner like a flow improver, as well as white mixed in. And that's where you get the opacity and the coverage. That is, however, how you get some inconsistencies when you mix, but that's another topic. So here I've mixed my blue and my yellow to a degree in which I'm happy. And now I'm just going to add a little bit of white. Now, white is very opaque. Very covering, which means it's very covering. It's hard to see through it. And while white gets a bad rap as though it's a paint that finishes chalky or uneven, that's simply because the pigment particles in a pure white paint are very large. But when mixed with other paints, it's kind of what gives you that sort of dream coverage that you're aiming for when painting a miniature. So here I just make up sort of a turquoise color, and again, I haven't added any water or thinner. I've just used the dampness of the clean brush, spread it thin on the palette, and now I've sort of mixed it evenly throughout the bristles. And now I'm just going to pick a spot on this little guy's face, that sort of baseball cap style lip, and you'll see that with very few strokes, the layer of paint goes on nice and smooth. Again, if it is smooth on the palette, it'll be smooth on the model. That's another reason I don't dip the brush typically in a tissue or paper towel, because it will pull out too much moisture, and then that beautiful, perfect mixture you made on the palette won't be in the brush anymore. And you'll get a different result that might frustrate you. But you can see that coated nice and smooth, and I've done nothing fancy here. It's just a resin miniature that sort of didn't have a great day at the printer. And then a little bit of primer. And it's just a gray primer. It wasn't even on very smooth, but you can see that the paint is going on nice and smooth. It's doing exactly what I want it to do. And that's just because of the way I prepared it on the palette and then the way I loaded the brush. And so for your base coat or layer consistency, that's kind of what you want to aim for. And hopefully you'll be able to put that to good use. I wonder if this guy can grow a beard. Maybe that's what I'll paint on him. There you go. Once I've finished lining his sort of beaky mouth there, I'm now going to show you how I can mix up a glaze. Let's say if I wanted to introduce a shadow to an area. So I've just got a little drop of water here to the left, and I'm going to grab my darker blue color and add a little bit of water to it. And now you can see that it's thinned out. And when you thin it with water, it does something a little different. I mean, it heavily dilutes the paint, which can lead to poor adhesion or binding, but that's okay because right now we just kind of want to hint at a color in an area. And it's going to be an area that faces down, that isn't that visible. But this is a way we can do that here. And I don't have to go looking for another color because I mixed his main color from the colors already on my palette. So by using those same ones, it will fit. So here what I'm doing is the same brush motions I did with a layer, but I'm drawing the bristles towards the area that I want to end up darkest. Because when the paint has been thinned with water, the surface tension is a little funky. And so the way the paint will come off is that it will deposit heaviest where the bristles stop the motion or where they're lifted off the surface. And then all I did was clean the brush and use those moist bristles to sort of feather out or erase the hard edge of the blue. And now our guy has a little bit of shadow. Now here I've just mixed in a little bit of white to our base color, and I'm going to do the same thing to sort of create a highlight with a glaze. So first I will paint it on, and again I haven't thinned this with anything. This is just drawn out on the palette. And I would just sketch in an area where I might want some highlight. Now right now that doesn't look like much, and it's a little bit uneven, but that's because we made quite a big jump. So then if I just go ahead and mix a glaze version of a color that's maybe just beneath the highlight color. Right? I'm just taking little droplets off the palette there that you can't see on the camera. But again, load it nice and even throughout the bristles. You can barely even see it there, but it will make a difference. And so now I can use water to thin my paint in a way that will just sort of erase lines. Or it can tint an area. As you'll see, I'll go right over that bright spot on the center of his lip there, and it will just sort of harmonize it with the layer underneath. So using water to thin down paints is great for that. But now I can show you a couple of different ways to thin your paints with something else. And why don't we go ahead and do it on the shell on the back side of this guy. So let's say I wanted to just use one color but create texture and perhaps affect the intensity of the shade by just thinning this one color different ways. So I'll use a couple different types. I'll use an acrylic-based thinner that you might use with, say, an airbrush. I will use a medium, which is essentially pigmentless paint. In this case, it's a satin medium from the Kimera base set. And then, of course, I'll use a little bit of water again. Now, the difference between the three, thinner reduces the viscosity or thickness of the paint for better flow and also faster drying. Sometimes it's necessary to thin your paint that way. A medium will increase the transparency while keeping the paint binding agent intact. So if you want the exact same color, but you want to make it a little more transparent, the medium's great for that. It's also, in my opinion, the best way to home make a wash, and we can talk about washes in another video. And then, of course, water does what we showed you before. It dilutes the paint and sort of breaks it. Now here, I'm mixing this color, this red oxide, with a little bit of the paint thinner, and you'll see that the intensity of the color is still the same. It just flows perhaps a little bit smoother off the brush. And sometimes that's exactly what you want, especially if you're trying to be precise, like I'm doing here, where I'm just tracing the line of that shell. That gave me a nice, smooth, precise line, and kind of kept the intensity. And then I just clean the brush off, and then with the natural dampness remaining in the bristles, again, water is a wonderful eraser. I can sort of get rid of that hard line, and then it sort of blends in, and I haven't even added another color. So that little dot in the lower right there, and that looks ironically like milk, that is the medium. It is a satin medium, so it'll have a slightly shiny finish, but that's not important here. Again, the medium is going to increase the transparency, but it will keep the pigment largely intact. And so if you thin it with enough medium, you can make it into a wash, which is wonderful. And now you'll see I do that here with this upper part of the shell. I've essentially created a wash that settles into those recesses, and it leaves a little bit of a coffee stain, as washes tend to do. But again, clean off the brush, wipe it on the microfiber, and then use just a little bit of water and you can erase that line. And that looks slightly different than it does with the airbrush thinner, doesn't it? And now with water, again, it just simply dilutes the paint, and so it's now not going to adhere as well to the surface as the other two, but it still has its uses. Again, water is a great eraser. If you need to thin a paint just a little bit, it's great. Or if you want to create something that's kind of like just a tint, just to hint at a color over a surface, because of the transparency that all three of these create, you can use them that way. You can really use any of these three thinners that you want and kind of get the same results, but each one kind of does its own thing a little easier than the other ones. But there you can see I've used the water, and it just sort of tints that rim of the shell, but it does bead up a little bit. It does break a teeny bit, and that is one downside to using water to thin your paint. Well, at any rate, I hope all of these were pretty useful methods to help you learn how to load your brush for base coating and layers, as well as how to thin your paint. I think the uses for each of these, my favorite might be with the airbrush thinner, because then I can almost draw with the paint. Though I do like homemaking washes with a medium. Water, of course, is an easy go-to when you've got nothing else handy, but anyway, these paints, this palette, can be found on Dracoya.com, and you can watch this and more videos like this on the Dracoya YouTube channel. Until next time, paint brave.